Hey, so glad you could join us on another Sixers Talk podcast. Danny Pommells, along with our NBC Sports Philadelphia Sixers writer, Noah Levick, our producer, Ben Berry, not available for this pod, but he is, of course, working diligently on all things Sixers related. It's funny, Noah, we're here with, various topics to discuss, but the inescapable Ben Simmons saga just continues to suck us in. We'll get into Doc Rivers' comments on ESPN about misremembering exactly what happened in that press conference after they lost to the Atlanta Hawks. But with this Ben Simmons stuff, I guess the Sixers are really forced into doing damage control because they haven't said anything until Doc Rivers started making the rounds on these national outlets. They needed to say something to try to change the narrative that's going out there that they're kind of being backed into the corner with Ben Simmons. But it is, Doc Rivers is trying to say that, of course they want to mend fences, which is one thing, but he feels like the ball is in their court where, so many people see it the other way around, that Ben Simmons not wanting to play is really him holding the trump card. Who is holding the trump cards here? Is it Sixers? Is it the Sixers or is it Ben Simmons, Noah?
I don't think I'd choose either side. I mean, I think both have valid points. I think Doc Rivers noting Simmons is under contract for 4 more years is certainly a rather significant fact. And it would be very unusual for a 25-year-old player who's 1 year into a rookie max extension to just do something as extreme as not playing for a season or whatever the highest level of threat might seem at this point. But on the other hand, Ben Simmons, as Doc Rivers made sure to note, is a very valuable player who was very integral to a lot of what the Sixers did. Sure, Joel Embiid is the best player on this team, but Ben Simmons, as we all know, made things a lot easier on other folks defensively, set a lot of guys up, as a transition facilitator offensively, etc. And if he just really stays firm here and the Sixers have him on the roster and he's refusing to play, that's not great for them, and they're not in an especially strong position there either. So I don't think the current state of affairs is ideal for either side, and I'm not sure either side holds all the cards here. I think both hold some cards, and I'm not sure either side is holding a royal flush or anything close to that. I'm not sure what the appropriate poker analogy is, but I think that's right.
No, you're right there in the pocket, bro. So if you think about the Sixers side of it, obviously, like I said, they need to say something and try to spin this in a different direction than the way it's going. So Doc Rivers has been given that task of being the face of this whole thing. This Simmons stuff is just continuing to mount into just classic diva behavior of I'm not getting my way, so you need to force a trade that's going to make me happy. And I just don't envision a scenario where it all comes back together. I just can't. You can't go from these heights of in extremes of saying I'm going to hold out and just unprecedented stuff that we haven't even seen come to fruition before, even with the Kyrie and James Harden stuff, as we talked about in the past. But it's just so, mind-boggling to think of how things have deteriorated so far. But even with the sentiment that the team wants to mend fences, I don't know if the public perception is there for them, the mending fences to happen. It would take some astronomical change in Ben Simmons' game, and for him to be accepted back as he is after all the things that he said. So do you think that is dual fold, where mending fences with the team is one thing, if that could happen, mending fences with the fan base is a completely different one?
Agreed. I think the team is the most important. If he's playing very well and has to endure a large volume of booze and some hypothetical that again doesn't look that likely right now, I think the Sixers would accept that, even if it's again suboptimal for your own player to be uh, despised by a fan base or heavily disliked. But yeah, it's notable. I think massive repairs would have to be done on the fan side, and you imagine those would be greater than those on the team side, where look, if he were to eventually commit to playing for the team again and were to play well, you imagine most folks would be on board with him and accept him back into that fold. But I just thought it was interesting, kind of as an indication of how unusual this is and how the scenario where he is accepted back is probably not something that looks that likely at this point. Doc Rivers brought up this example of like Sean Elliott and the Spurs, and he didn't exactly recall it correctly. He thought that Sean Elliott like immediately failed a physical and then went right back to the Spurs, and I had to look it up to be sure, but like he spent an entire year away from the Spurs, and it was the trade from the Pistons to the Rockets that actually was voided because he failed a physical due to his kidney condition. So anyway, like you really have to strain for examples to find something comparable to this, where a player is very, very determined not to play for a team again, and then does, and everything goes swimmingly. So at least publicly, Doc Rivers is saying that that is what the Sixers would like to happen. So we shall see if that actually comes to be.
We'll get into more about Doc Rivers fudging some details on what are really facts, or I don't know if you take people at their word of what they say and then they backtrack or try to re-examine what they said, and we'll get into that. But along with all the Simmons fodder and them trying to make sure that they're getting their narrative out there, Stephen A. Smith mentioned a trade that he had heard was probably on the table or there for the Sixers to choose if they would accept, which was CJ McCollum, Robert Covington, and 2 first-round picks from the Portland Trailblazers. Are we at the point where the Sixers need to just fish or cut bait? Do you feel like them not accepting whatever the best offer is out there, theoretically, let's say that this is the best offer, particularly considering what the Golden State Warriors front office had to say. But do you feel like this is the type of trade that the Sixers need to come to grips with and just bite the bullet on moving on from Simmons instead of trying to convince people that it's going to work out and to hold out for something better?
Yeah, I'd be hesitant to take a bite the bullet kind of mentality and to allow the situation where camp is looming to dictate things too strongly. But that particular trade that Stephen A. Smith reported, I think is a pretty good trade. I think we've mentioned CJ McCollum a lot as a player who would make sense on paper, and uh, Sixers fans obviously know what Robert Covington brings to the table. You're also getting draft assets that could theoretically help you down the line in acquiring a superstar. There's quite a few things to like there. So that individual trade that's reported is one that I personally would give very strong consideration to, but I don't think you can necessarily take a blanket approach to every trade offer that is out there. I think it has to be a case by case situation, and that's probably the right way to go about it if you're Daryl Morey. But that particular one, no doubt, is intriguing.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, your approach is to continue to hold water. Like you're going to just, you're in the stare down at this point. Like we're somebody's going to blink and it's not going to be us type of thing. That's the approach you feel like the Sixers should take.
Well, I'm not sure I go quite that far in the idea of we're going to be the ones who don't blink. Like, I would, very seriously consider blinking for that specific trade proposal that was reported. But I just don't
Do you feel
think.
like something better might come along? Do you feel like waiting until camp is actually, the days away from camp? I mean, here we are, what is the 22nd? We're about 7 days away.
Something better, yeah, absolutely. Might come along. I think, only Daryl Morey and the Sixers front office know every single offer that is on the table, know where they're at in these various negotiations with the teams. And I just think it has to be a case by case sort of situation. It can't be something where just because we're close, that elevates the level of desperation and leads you to drastically drop your price. And I do think it's a valid point, kind of what you're getting at. Of they've gone this far, so if something better does seem like it might materialize based on the discussions that you've had with these teams and based on your gut feel, probably in some of these cases, of what teams might be looking for early in the regular season, then yeah, I guess you might as well wait at this point. I think that's a fair enough way to look at it.
Man, the timeline is the timeline, and there's no changing it. So if I have this right, media day is the 27th. Training camp starts the 28th. Ben Simmons is owed a nice chunk of his salary on October 2nd. Are those dates? Do those mean anything to you? Are you making a move before some of those things happen? Are you withholding salary? What do you think is the Sixers' approach at that point as these kind of mandatory things come up?
Yeah, kind of as I was alluding to earlier, I wouldn't be swayed too heavily by the dates themselves in terms of
Mm.
we need to approach negotiations in an extremely urgent way, because we see a lot of trades happen pre-trade deadline. We see a lot of trades happen in the early stages of the regular season. If you want to compare it to the Jimmy Butler situation, that one went down in November. Obviously, that's probably not a template the Sixers want to follow, but it is true that I don't think something needs to get done before camp or needs to get done, on media day or anything along those lines. I think it's just a very fluid situation based on what Doc Rivers said of the Sixers are holding out hope that this relationship with Simmons, that I think is fair to characterize as frosty at this point, improves to the extent that he at least gives some thought to going to camp, or that he is a little deterred by the idea of being fined or suspended by the team, or the threat of something like that happening. So I just think you have to weigh a lot of those factors. But to me, the big picture is these dates coming up at this point aren't all important. They're key in that the season is approaching and that it's really tough for the Sixers if they remain in limbo. But they've been in limbo for quite a while here. And again, I think it's just something where you got to approach the negotiations with a level head and do what you think's best for your team.
I think they have been in sort of a limbo, but I think, earlier in the summer, like, Rich Paul and Ben Simmons and company request this trade after the season. And as the months go on, the more pressure mounts. Um, you start off the summer with the expectation that your price is high and, you can get 4 draft picks and an all-star from another team. And here we are as camp approaches, the number has to come down in some aspects, but they're also kind of hand tied by the fact that players who have been traded, in this period of free agency and whatnot, can't be moved again until December. So you have so many other factors of players who might be able to be moved that you'll have to wait till almost the new year in order to kind of get your hands on, those deals or what have you. I mean, maybe you can, in theory, have something on paper, and then once the time comes, specifically like Lauri Markkanen, he can't be traded until December if the Sixers were able to work something out with Cleveland, which is kind of enticing considering what's on the table. We have talked about this being a 3-team thing. Do you feel like the Sixers can make it to December where other players would be available with things that the way they are? Like, obviously a lot has to happen until then, but I just don't see how it all comes together in a way that is beneficial for the team to make a run at a championship with all of these distractions.
Yeah, it doesn't look that likely right now, especially since even if everything was great with Ben Simmons, like they're not the favorites in the Eastern Conference. They're not even close. I think the Bucks are ahead of them. They're the defending NBA champions. So the Sixers are at best kind of in that second tier. You know, they're in that second tier, not at best. They're in that second tier of the Eastern Conference. Um, and yeah, all these none of what's going on here with Simmons is great for anyone. But what ultimately matters the most, as we've talked about before, is how it ends. So if it ends in a way where the Sixers pull off a fantastic deal, then that's great, and they do well from a talent perspective. And you know, if a deal happens in December, you have quite a few months to make everything work on court wise. But I did think it was telling, kind of to your point here, that Doc Rivers in this interview on ESPN with Stephen A. Smith, he was, I'll find the exact wording here. He said, if Ben doesn't go back in the fold, I don't have an expectation because I don't know where we will go. That'll happen if it happens. Like, so he's basically acknowledging there that he hasn't thought much about the team beginning this season with Ben Simmons not on its roster, uh, and that's not great. No matter how you look at it. Uh, Maybe he's playing that down a little, of course. I mean, this is a smart guy who cares about coaching his team. I'm sure he's thought about contingencies where the Sixers trade Simmons and Tyrese Maxey is the starting point guard, or Simmons doesn't report, and so other guys have to fill some ball handler minutes or what have you. But the uncertainty here is immense, and that is negative as things stand. But if the Sixers play everything right and pull off a great trade, that's an extreme positive that probably outweighs some of this negativity and uncertainty that the team is currently having to weather.
I want to get your thoughts on something that Derek Bodner from The Athletic wrote. And it was really just the idea, shout out Derek, he does a great job over there, but the idea that the trade that they have now, which could be heavily draft pick weighted, is possibly a catalyst to making another trade at the deadline. So there's like a two-part scenario to the trade where the Sixers could, get a heavily draft compensated trade for Ben Simmons and then parlay that into a marquee all-star at the trade deadline. Are they thinking that far? Would they be remiss not to be thinking that far? Do you feel like what's happening now is too urgent that they can't project to something like that? Or what do you see there?
Yeah, I think it's a good way to look at it. I'm confident that it's something Morey and the Sixers front office are keenly aware of, and it's it's one reason that an offer that is heavily based around draft compensation isn't something the Sixers would just shoot down, even if that might seem somewhat counterintuitive for a team that
right now, right? Yeah.
now, but it's not easy to make deals that you quote unquote win in the NBA again and again.
Right.
And it's no guarantee that the Sixers acquiring 2 or 3 first round picks would land them a player who fits well with Joel Embiid at the trade deadline. You just can't guarantee that. But no, it's one reason absolutely that an offer that includes first round picks would be intriguing for this team. And certainly if you still have aspirations of getting a player like Damian Lillard or a generic disgruntled superstar in a year or 2 years. Often those trades include multiple first round draft picks,
Right.
and that's certainly something that would be great for the Sixers to have in theory.
It is messy out here in these Sixer streets, Noah. I mean, golly. I mean, it's just so many scenarios and variants. I feel like we're doing a Marvel episode of What If sometimes, where we're trying to figure out like, this decision turned into that, and like these three choices led to this choice. And in all of this, looking at the bigger NBA landscape, I mentioned the tampering comments from the Warriors GM Joe Lacob. With the Minnesota Timberwolves letting go of their GM for various reasons, but one of which is an affair that he had in the office, Garrison Rosas. How do not necessarily Lacob's comments, but the Timberwolves having an upheaval affect maybe what might happen with Simmons, a team that he has reportedly been linked to in trade discussions, and maybe a package might be a team that might play a role in a package for Ben Simmons, or might be the destination for Ben Simmons. Do you have an opinion on how those things might affect this?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, Joe Lacob, the Warriors owner, that was very bizarre to me that he was like, you saw that and you immediately thought this is going to be fine, this is going to be tampering, and I guess his main point was he's skeptical of the idea that Ben Simmons would fit well with Draymond Green and Steph Curry, and very, very weird thing for an owner to do, and it seems like an automatic fine.
The
Yeah, I mean,
defensive player of the year candidate in Philadelphia is the way he put it.
yeah, that's not a great loophole. Yeah, as far as the Wolves, another odd situation. I wouldn't want to speculate too much on what it means. It seems like a lot's developing, and there are a lot of moving parts there. But it is notable that the person who's reportedly taken over the number one basketball ops role there, at least for the time being, is Sachin Gupta, who was Sam Hinkie's number two here during the process era, and has worked with Daryl Morey in the past. So obviously there have been discussions between the Sixers and Timberwolves. Those have been widely reported, and you'd expect those continue, and that those discussions have a different dynamic now. And it's just an unknown variable of what's going to be different about those discussions. Does Minnesota maybe have more willingness to part with prized young players such as Anthony Edwards? Are they stubborn on that front if they don't want to include a player of Edwards' caliber, et cetera? Things are clearly going to change there, but it's just really difficult to tell right now exactly what's going to be different in Minnesota. Obviously, they've got a new ownership group coming in, waiting in the wings here, including Alex Rodriguez. So it's going to be fascinating to monitor things up there. And I'm sure Daryl Morey will continue talking with that organization.
Sachin Gupta, the first Indian American to ever run an NBA organization. So, props to him for reaching those heights. However, he reached them because sometimes in this industry and their industry and various industries, you reach a new position because someone retired, got fired, what have you, things along those lines. You mentioned Gupta and his connection to Sam Hinkie, Daryl Morey, worked with him in Houston. Do you feel like the Sixers are in a situation where they're kind of chasing their tail, trying to figure out this Ben Simmons thing? Because if you're putting Doc Rivers out there to try to do damage control after the entire summer is over, you can't make the trade. Where the Simmons side hasn't actually said anything. We've heard reports from Keith Pompey, from Adrian Wojnarowski, but they haven't actually said anything. So it's almost like the Sixers are like bidding against themselves in a sense, because they have to say something in order to change the narrative about the trade that they hope to make, where at this point in time, they don't have anything on the table that they're satisfied with. So it's almost like you're chasing your tail, so to speak.
Yeah, I would say it just the way things are in the NBA media landscape these days is that if someone highly reputable, such as Adrian Wojnarowski, reports something, even if it's not on the record, it's generally treated as fact. And for that reason, I think a lot of what we've heard about Ben Simmons not intending to be at camp and not intending to play for the Sixers again, most folks, understand that to be true. And obviously, these sorts of things have been communicated, among team executives. So I'm not sure that the Sixers being the first to go on the record is a massive deal. But as you said, I agree that it's not an incredible look here. It certainly does not make them look like they have um, control over this situation. That Doc Rivers would feel the need to go on a national show and speak
A
about,
couple of national shows, yeah.
kind of make a mini national rounds. It's not a great thing, but is it highly influential? I doubt it's very influential here. I think it's a lot of just about controlling the message in terms of like what fans are hearing. Uh, Obviously, they're probably interested in Ben Simmons, what he's hearing, but I'm not sure that um, it's something that is going to shift things in a dramatic way.
You mentioned the Timberwolves' new ownership group. I can't find it right now, but I know I've read something or saw something about Alex Rodriguez and the new ownership group having a fondness for Elton Brand. Did you see something
Yeah,
like that out there?
I saw Jake Fisher
Okay.
reported that the new ownership group thinks highly of Brand and that he's a name to have on the radar, I
Man,
guess.
that's kind of random. It's just nobody does drama off season like the Sixers, man. It's just
Yeah, yeah,
even unsolicited. Obviously, they have no control over Elton's name being mentioned, but just something else to add to all of this fodder.
indeed. Yeah. I mean, the report didn't suggest that anything was imminent there.
Eminent, right? There was no level to it. But his name being like we've been through these type of speculation. The New York Knicks supposedly had a
Right.
fondness for Elton as well.
Correct.
Nothing really came of that, but
Yeah, I mean, it does tell you something about him just being a very well liked and well respected guy.
oh, the Detroit Pistons as well. Did they have something? I
I don't
thought, but
recall that.
maybe I'm wrong.
I do know the Knicks,
Okay.
had some interest there. But yeah, Elton Brand is a hard worker who obviously was a good player and has developed a strong reputation over the years as someone who's an intelligent person, on the executive side as well. Did his first stint as the number one basketball operations guy go excellently? No, it did not. But you figure he's due for a second shot if he wants it at some point. And maybe that'll come in Minnesota. We shall see.
I think that it's interesting though because we've tried to paint this picture before, but just to hammer it home, we get uh, caught in being prisoners of the moment, particularly with the Simmons stuff, which may, we'll see how those ramifications play out. But man, so many people were heavy-handed on Elton Brand's incompetence and the mistakes that he made, and it's a lot of things that he owned up to in front of the media. But here in this area, Sixers fans felt really bad about the fact that Elton had underperformed in his role and before Daryl Morey came in. But in the larger landscape, particularly by the Knicks report, which was a little around that time, but probably a little before it all kind of fell apart, so to speak. But this Timberwolves report just gives credence to the idea that it isn't quite always as it seems with the recency bias that you may have toward certain guys or situations. Elton Brand still highly respected, highly sought after just by this random idea, report from Jake Fisher, unsolicited. It just didn't have any connection for them to be bullish on Elton Brand. It just caught me off guard. So, in that same vein, Ben Simmons, we kind of see how things have changed. I mean, on, even by the Warriors owners' comments, that maybe it's not quite as rosy outside of this area as some people might project, but it isn't as doom and gloom as we project it to be either. So I just think that has some merit right there in the comparison between how we might see certain people, front office execs, players, what have you, and how the larger NBA landscape might view them.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, always good idea to take a step back. I will just say, with Elton Brand, obviously in that position, you're judged most by the results and most by the big money moves, and those by and large weren't good. But the circumstances of like what the dynamics here were with the Sixers front office are notable. And let's face it, this was a front office that managing partner Josh Harris and co-managing partner David Blitzer were determined to be a collaborative one where a lot of people had a voice. So, you look at some.
Good point. Good point. So it's not all on Elton and the decisions that were made. He might have been the face of it, but.
Yeah, and that's not to say that he had zero say or influence, but a lot of other folks clearly had a lot of influence. And it was his first job. And even he was very candid about he didn't have the experience to handle a lot of situations as well as he would have liked to. And he did a lot of learning on the job. For me, I just think the process of him getting that position, there's a lot of room for criticism there because of this determination that there be so much collaboration and that there not be one person with a final say necessarily. And I think that there's a lot of indications that took other potential strong candidates out of the mix, and the Sixers ended up hiring someone who admitted maybe he wasn't entirely ready for the job and only had G League executive experience. So we can get into that whole history, at another time. But
I think it's
Elton Brand. It was his first gig. The Sixers didn't have great results during his tenure, but he was far from the only one who are responsible for what happened during that time.
And you make a great point, because he had the inexperience, which will probably lend him to being more amenable to a collaborative approach, where someone else who was longer in the tooth in the NBA landscape will want to be more hands-on themselves and not have as many, cooks in the kitchen, so to speak. So he, different people for different molds, and he fit the mold that they were trying to fill. So let's take a time out here and we'll get into more of this Doc Rivers conversation with Stephen A. Smith on First Take. And really, I think which kind of the thing that really turned a lot of Sixers fans' heads and made them question Doc a bit. We'll get into that after this timeout. Ready to make a move? A Wilmington University education can take you where you want to go. WilmU works online or in person. Learn more at wilmu.edu. Doc Rivers and his recollection of history. Hey, man, this dude has been around the league and forgotten more basketball knowledge than many of us will ever know. Obviously, a dynamic player. Well, he was a good player. He, has raised sons who have been NBA players. He's, won NBA championships and whatnot. So there's a lot of basketball in that brain. Specifically, he tried to recall the comments that he made after the Hawks game when the Sixers lost. And on First Take, we talked about the Sean Elliott thing. Noah did specifically, just saying how he kind of didn't quite have the details right on how that transpired. And he didn't have the details right on how things transpired after the Game 7 loss to the Hawks, because in his recollection, the first question out of the reporters' mouths was about if Ben Simmons can be a point guard on a championship caliber team. That was from Dave Murphy of the Philadelphia Inquirer. It was actually the fifth question that he was asked, and he tried to spin it on First Take as him, saying like that was a nonsense question. I don't want to, talk about that. I would never. I don't want to comment on that. When in actuality, his answer to the question of can he be a point guard on a championship caliber team was I don't know the answer to that right now. So, regardless of how it was perceived, regardless of what he intended, the way it was perceived from the guy who he was discussing was it was a gigantic slight. So it really doesn't matter what or how, unless Ben is going to forgive him and consider that water under the bridge and show up to camp, it really doesn't matter what he says and how he wants to, say that his words were intended. The way they were received and the way that it was felt from Simmons and his camp was that, oh, this dude thinks I'm a bum and I'm not, I'm paraphrasing obviously, but it's just they're received as he's not up to snuff. So are you buying it, Noah? Do you feel like this is just more spin, or what's your perception?
Yeah, to me, it's actually a pretty complicated situation.
They're all complicated.
Yeah.
So much of all this stuff we talk about is complicated.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, it's not
Are
something.
you letting them off the hook? Are you letting them off the hook, Noah?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't support the notion of calling the media a monolith and saying this was misrepresented. Like, obviously, every reporter did their own thing with this. And then he later tried to hint at, like, well, the next day I said,
The next day, yeah.
The words were very bullish on Ben. And I guess that people sort of ignored that. Like, no, like, I know myself and others, we wrote about the post game 7 reaction. We also wrote about what he had to say the next day. And some of this is also just on what people who are consuming the media make of what was said. And as you alluded to, people found the I don't know answer telling at the time. But I do also understand where he's coming from in the sense of it seemed like that answer was blown up to be bigger than it actually was. I just found it an honest response. The exact words are, I don't know that question or the answer to the answer to that right now. I don't know the answer to that. There's not much there. He's responding, I don't know, to a lot of questions. And at the time, he was frustrated and lost, having just been defeated and a really devastating game 7. But that's not to say it's irrelevant or that he should have the expectation that no one is going to report what he said. Like, he's been doing this long enough. He knows if someone asks him a weighty question like that and he responds with I don't know, that is going to be reported, and that in all likelihood people are going to find that a significant thing that he said. And of course, it doesn't come across well that he's fudging some of the details about that being the first.
No, it does not. No, it does not.
Trying to make himself look better and to paint the media as an enemy. Obviously, personally, I'm not a fan of any of that, and I don't think many reporters are. But I think the underlying point is not invalid, that this was blown out of proportion. I don't know if misrepresented is the right word, but someone just giving an answer of like, look, I don't really know, when this person has been very supportive of Ben Simmons all season. And then the next day does speak at length about why he believes in Simmons and what Simmons specifically needs to work on, and on and on. Like I can understand if I was in his role, I would have some frustration and I would feel that my words were not accurately portrayed, perhaps. So I think it's nuanced. But yeah, if you were scoffing at Doc Rivers' comments, totally understand where you're coming from. But even if he didn't go about it in the best way, I think the point of, hey, I wasn't conveying some sort of profound lack of faith in Ben Simmons, as many seemingly now believe based on how they're discussing this, 15-word answer I gave. I think that's kind of a fair point to make as well.
I see your point. And yes, it did contradict a lot of the things he said about Ben, swimmingly super endorsing him as a player and what he brings to the table. But you do get truth from people in the heat of the battle, or subsequently thereafter. He's here in this press conference. They just lost, and he's asked a question, and maybe he says more than he wanted to, or didn't say enough, or wasn't as profound as he normally is. And then the next day, you try to walk back those things because you had time to think about it. Like, bro, I'm married. Sometimes my wife and I have disagreements, and you could say something that wasn't clear or didn't quite have all of the adjectives and clarifying aspects to it. And then, you want to, recollect that and kind of clean it up and what have you. But this is what I 200% hang my hat on, is that may be true. But if the question was asked, hey, is Joel Embiid the type of center that you can build a team around to win a championship, or however you want to phrase it, I guarantee you he would not have said, I'm not sure, I don't know the answer to that. Maybe even Tobias. Maybe even if that same question was phrased around Tobias. To me, you can tie it to what so many people have done, what Joel said after the game, of the moment that he felt that the turning point was when they passed up the dunk underneath, relating it to Ben Simmons, and then went 1 of 2 from the free throw line. So I guarantee he wouldn't have that same perspective about Joel Embiid if that fifth question in the press conference was, hey, do you feel Joel Embiid is the type of center that you can build a championship team around? He's not going to say, I don't know the answer. I guarantee, there's no way he responds that way. So, okay, yeah, maybe what he really wanted to say was, yeah, maybe as a point guard, he might be better as a point forward. Or maybe what he wanted to say is, yeah, he can be, but he needs to work on these few things, which he kind of clarified the next day. But I just feel like there's some truth there related to that, his response in that question.
Yeah, no, I think that's a stellar point. What stood out to me is this was like an astoundingly truthful answer, that there was zero diplomacy or zero of the
right. And if you talk to him and you've looked at when he gives answers, that he, like, his face and his body language, and I don't like to read too much into that, but I feel like it's a piece of the puzzle. It had that I'm Doc Rivers telling the truth body language look to it, where we have seen him do that things in other press conferences and situations. Yes, that may be some of a stretch, but when you're trying to tie these things together and get to the crux of it, not to interrupt you with that, but I just don't buy his response and the way he's trying to, spin it now.
Definitely, yeah, and came across as very truthful, in part because, like, how could you say anything else and sound credible, right? Like, Ben Simmons
Right.
just shot 33% from the line in the series, just passed up this dunk, was sitting out important fourth quarter possessions in that series. He's not saying, no, this is a player who's broken beyond repair. He's just saying, I don't know. And I like that seems like who knows? There's no such thing as a correct answer, but it seems like an
Right.
honest answer, if nothing else. And if he were to have that situation back, I'm imagining he just would have preferred to not shroud the honesty, but at least include some more context of, look, Ben clearly has some things he needs to work on. We still think he's an extremely valuable, versatile player. And with 1 or 2, tweaks to his game, yes, he will be that player for us, even if he wasn't this season. Something like that. I'm sure
Yes.
Doc Rivers, he would have been truthful technically, and he also would have avoided some of this storm where this comment was blown up to be Doc Rivers doesn't believe in Ben Simmons. So yeah, I'm
Uh,
sure, probably, based on what he said, regrets his approach in that emotional moment after a game 7 loss, and now is trying to spin it, or at least tell his side of the story, in a way that, lets people in on, look, this was not me trying to blast Ben Simmons, or me trying to say that I don't believe that this guy is great and can become even greater. But he doesn't have a lot of folks who are sympathetic to that. It doesn't seem like, which I can totally understand.
well, I think that where the BS lies for me is that the media didn't have to spin it for Ben to feel some type of way. He heard the comments from Doc. Like, the media doesn't need to spin it and, misinterpret what he said for Ben to be upset about it. Like, Ben heard the comments and felt that it was an infringement on his capabilities and what he could do. So for Ben to be upset and to feel like, those were fighting words, so to speak, and for him to feel like that was the line in the sand where, hey, in this Chicago, pre-draft camp where everyone's here, I want to make sure it's known after the season that I don't want to be here anymore. Like, the media didn't have to spin that in any way for Ben to feel that type of way. And I also feel like Doc's insulting our intelligence because of the point that you just made, where he is always so colorful and careful with what he says. Why would this moment be a moment where he wouldn't be that way when he's always trying to quantify and clarify and choose words that, compliment Ben Simmons and make him see a certain way. But now suddenly, you're spinning what I said, and what I said wasn't actually what I meant. And, you're taking it out of however you want to, he's trying to spin it, because you choose your words carefully and pinpoint the actual thing you want to say regarding Ben so many other times. But here in this moment, the truth comes out a little bit more, in my estimation. And then the next day, you're trying to walk it back.
Yeah, the circumstances, I think, are also notable here, of like, this is on Zoom and it's this press conference being streamed or watched on television or whatever by, probably thousands of people in the moment, and certainly maybe we've reached millions at this point after the moment. But it is what it is, that nowadays these post-game press conferences, there's a theatrical or performative element to them, where it's like the people that are talking to us feel like there are certain things they have to say because they're cognizant of how many people are watching, and that their players are going, for the coaches, their players are going to hear what they say and what have you. So, it kind of is what it is. And in my view, might prefer a situation where these things are less formal, and you're able to talk to people in a setting that's a little more organic and a little less awkward, and a little less like this is a politician on a stage trying to give a perfect speech, 10, 15 minutes after his team lost a game. So I do have some sympathy from that angle, but it's the job. These people, when they sign these contracts, a relatively small part of the job, but a part of the job is interacting with the media and being professional and trying to do their best in how they converse with us. And Doc Rivers has been doing this for a very long time, so he's not naive about any of this. He knows that a lot of people were listening to that. And even if he's frustrated and even if he feels devastated in that moment, it is his obligation to be thinking about who's listening to his words. And perhaps he wasn't doing that as much as he would have wished in that situation.
Last thought, do you feel like if Doc's comments were in a silo, without Embiid's comments, or Embiid's comments came without Doc's comments, that we would still be where we are, where Simmons was so offended that he wanted out? Like, do you feel like it was the combination of the two? Was it Doc's comments on his own? Was it Joel's comments on his own, even though Ben might not have said that? Like, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I don't want to speculate too much, just since we haven't had a chance to speak to Ben Simmons.
We haven't heard a thing from him. That's all we got is speculation at this
Right.
point.
Who knows? Yeah, but something like that where it's kind of like some of this interpersonal stuff of how you perceive what other people are saying about you. It's really tough. You would get a lot of
Tough
insight
to put words in his
talking
mouth.
to him. So to me, that's a tough one. I know Ben Simmons speaking that night, though. People remember, him asking how many assists did I have, and kind of trying to highlight, like, look, I wasn't the only reason we lost this game, even though he didn't say that. He also, to me, seemed humbled in that moment, and was candid about, I didn't have a good offensive series. I have to get better in a lot of areas. So it felt like a very raw moment for everyone involved, and that everyone in the Sixers was aware that they had failed, and knew, Ben Simmons included, that Simmons was a key reason why they lost that game in that series. But yeah, I don't have an answer for exactly how that might have changed things. But I imagine both comments carried a bit of weight, given this is the head coach and the MVP runner-up weighing in on the situation.
Hey, if you're a fan of Doc Rivers and the things he had to say here in this interview with Stephen A. Smith on First Take, they were a game away from the Eastern Conference Finals. That's how he perceives it. We're getting there. We're growing. We're building something, or what have you. Remains to be seen if Ben Simmons will be a part of what they're building. If you're listening to the Sixers, they're hoping that he will be. A trade is not what they want to do. They want to keep Ben in-house, reportedly. But we will continue to monitor and keep you up to date on everything happening with this team, as we have been all off season. Noah, anything of note that you want to mention that you're working on right now?
Yeah, just in these few days leading up to media day on Monday, I'll have some content previewing it. I'll have 5 storylines, and not everything will be about Ben Simmons. So keep an eye out for that. And yeah, we're almost there. Media day Monday, training camp Tuesday, and everything's going to escalate even further in terms of all this drama.
Yes, it will be. He is Noah Levick. I'm Danny Pommells. For our producer, Ben Berry, we appreciate you listening to Sixers Talk, brought to you by Wilmington University. WilMU works. We'll see you next time.